I am Darrow Lachlan from the Shire of Eresgard in the Kingdom of Avakal, and as my eyes grow dim and my body grows infirm, I must seek ways to maintain my mobility while my body continues to fail. Hildegrad of Bingen speaks of infirmitas, the collective for illness, disease, disorder, and disability. I see in my books the decrepiti, the aged, the overworked. I see the defecti, those of imperfect form. I see those born with defecti, the monstra. I read of Anglo-Saxon mothers who have received night visits from demons and their children born monstra. Hildegrad of Bingen feels no, this is not the case. It is the child born under the waning moon that is to be weak, infirm, and not virtuous. Our new scholars, the mathematicians, the astronomers, they know for fact that when Saturn is in the wrong house, the child born at that time will be monstra. But to think in this way is to fall prey, perhaps, to superstition, paganism, and magic. A naturalistic magic, perhaps from the documents of the 13th century Germany, they declare an indication of bed rest and herbals. The wise woman says to me, "Take 2 sips of willow bark tea and call me in the morning." My magic becomes sorcery. My sorcery becomes witchcraft. And witchcraft begets evil. Thomas Aquinas tells us that demons are evil and magic requires a pact with them. Therefore, all magic is evil. Should I perhaps take heed of the university-educated physician? Richard Anglicus writes, "I think the infirm are incurable, and I could find nothing certain, or of the fruit of their experience, in these authors that I have read. Though there are some quacks who vainly try to cure the infirm, I boldly assert that surgery and physic are useless, and so consider it unworthy of my attention." Having spoken thus, we can only assume Ricardus has picked up a flask of urine, held it to the light to determine whether he should leech his patient to rebalance his humors. The physicians can't treat me. The church vilifies the wise woman. What am I to do? I see myself a man of letters. Perhaps I should see myself briefly as a man of vision. I look to the illuminations, the illustrations within my manuscripts. I see a wounded soldier from the Arthurian romances, a crutch in one hand, a sword in the other, returning to the fray, proudly displaying his prestigious battle scars. Thietmar of Merseburg says that these mutilations should bring no shame but great honor. I look in the literal psalter and I see the image of a child in a cart. The child is disfigured and is begging for alms. Their assistant wheels them through the scene. I see in the Liber Medicinarum a man on crutches, an open wound bleeding upon his thigh. While these images do not portray these characters in a demeaning way, there is an underlying theme that they may in fact be marked out for their sins. A disfigured body is the outward expression of a disfigured soul. A pure soul can exist only in a pure body. And to find the pure body, I must find divine intervention, the touch of an anointed king, the blessing or absolution of my parish priest. Ultimately, my corrupted flesh can only be saved through the healing power of a miracle. When we look at the canonization of saints between 1200 and 1300 years, we find that 90% of all their miracles were therapeutic. We find that 29% of all their miracles cured the defecti. In the Illuminations, we see pilgrims seeking a miracle at Mont Saint-Michel. We see the blind, we see the lame, we see the disfigured. We see St. Martin sharing his cloak with a beggar. We see St. Elizabeth feeding the poor. In these images, the saints are superior, fully a head and shoulders taller than the unfortunates, literally and figuratively towering above the afflicted. In these illustrations, these illuminations, we see the peasants walking with aids, the cane, the auxiliary crutch, hand crutches, and bent knee pegs. All these aids have a deep history going back into Egyptian times, 2,500 years before me speaking to you. You ask me what aids are for my time and place. I tell you my time and place are irrelevant. These aids have been used throughout Europe, throughout the Levant, throughout North Africa, for over 4 millennia. How are these aids made, you ask? They're made with whatever material is available. They use simple tools, the axe, the knife, the saw, the mallet, the rasp, chisels. To build a cane, it is simply a shaft of wood with a handle curved to conform to the hand. But should my infirmity increase, I may need to move to a crutch. The shaft becomes longer. The handle now reaches to my armpit, and I can fully commit my weight to my walking aid. Time passes, my infirmity increases. My legs have now failed me. I'm now a child, crawling on all fours. A hand crutch, one in each hand, is used to drag me across the ground. Again, I am a child. Too much rich food and too much wine has led me to gout, and gout to gangrene, and to gangrene and amputation. No longer do my simple aids suffice. I now must look to the bent knee peg. My wounded limb lies across the cradle, my knee and my thigh above. With aid of my replacement leg and my crutch, I can now continue to move through my medieval world.
Mid-12th century Japanese noblewoman's traveling outfit by Sugawara no Naeme. I have created a traveling outfit consisting of 3 garments and a veiled hat with decorative cords, modeled after an example found at the Kyoto Costume Museum. My traveling outfit would be appropriate for a noblewoman of modest rank of the late Heian period for traveling to a shrine or temple. The kosode is made of plain weave silk, hand-sewn with silk thread. This is a base layer and is only visible at the collar in the final ensemble. The hitoe is constructed from silk taffeta that was overdyed to the appropriate shade of green. It was also hand-sewn with silk thread. The iwagi is a synthetic brocade lined in silk taffeta of a darker shade. The upper is attached to the lining so that the lining is visible around all the edges. The garment was hand-sewn with silk thread. The sheer panels for the hat are also silk, hand-sewn with silk thread, and the decorative cords are hand-woven from silk thread on a marodai. The sewing and weaving for the entire ensemble was completed in 100 days.
It took many hours of hand sewing. All the seams are hand sewed. With the running stitch. House Grey Dragon on their website had pictures from the museum in Basel, Switzerland of a pavilion, and it showed the seams, and they used the running stitch. So when I saw that, I realized that what stitch I could use to put this together authentically. The design of the tent, they did have square pavilions with a center pole and 4 corner poles. We have images with that. The actual design of this tent is to fit my disability, as accommodation for my disability. And now we're going to go in and look at the inside. So we're going through the front. The walls tie. These are 5-strand braids that I made to tie the walls together. Can be tied in different frigged. Put enough there, as you can see, all the way down. And we'll go in. There's a little bit of a valance. We'll go in. And my center pole needed to be a little bit taller, so I have a few pieces of wood underneath it. This is how I attach the wall to the top. This is a toggle. This is a yarn covered washer that I made. These were little strips of bias tape sewn into the tent. And then it's got, this is a 3-strand braid for a loop. Stitch onto the canvas. I'm going to go up here. It's easier to see the stitching when you can see the blue, and that is the blue lines that go up the center. It goes all the way up. These were hand stitched at 2 different times. The first time I made this tent, I did not have this part stitched down, and I put the tent up in pouring rain deluge, and it leaked here, where at this seam right here. So hopefully it leaked on these seams right here coming through. So hopefully by stitching this down it won't leak there anymore. And if it does, then I will probably hit it with some kind of sealant there. And then even the valance is sewed on. This is where you can see the stitching the best. Valance all the way around. And even this corner seam is stitched. It's hard to tell because it's basically natural on natural. I used 100% cotton crochet thread. The canvas is cotton duck that I got from a canvas making company in Georgia called Big Duck Canvas. Cotton duck is the most watertight canvas you can get. And the wood poles, I actually bought those at Lowe's. They are closet rods. They are 1 1/4 inch. The middle center pole is an 8-foot closet rod. The corner poles are 6-foot closet rods. I didn't discuss the tie downs are sisal rope, and the stakes are iron stakes that Sir Tetsuo, I'm sorry, Viscount Tetsuo in Crossroad made for me. I commissioned them from him. Sir Cedric of Thanet made the wooden rope sliders for me. And I just put a nail at the end of the pole to hold my rope here. And so thank you for watching my video.
Hello, my name is Isabel del Okes, and I'm from the barony of Carolingia in the East Kingdom. I've made a reproduction of a 10th century Coptic-bound book with papyrus bookboards. My book is based on MSM 597 from the Morgan Library and Museum's Coptic binding collection. My version is made with papyrus bookboards, waxed linen thread, modern parchment paper, linen cloth, hide glue, wheat paste, and veg tan goat leather. The sewing of the text block and the attachment of the covers is based on information presented in the Archaeology of Medieval Bookbinding by J.A. Sirmai and Early Islamic Bookbindings and Their Coptic Relations by Theodore C. Peterson.
I first want to show you my test book so you can see how I sewed my text block together. You can see the papyrus bookboards and the chain stitching in 4 different sewing stations. And the hinges, all of this is done with waxed linen thread. And the linen thread is looped 4 times through each of those holes and connected together with another bit of linen thread as you travel from one hole to another. And this is my finished book. It is decorated with a blind tooled cover. And the inside, you can see, has leather turn downs. All of this was attached with hide glue. And you can see the modern parchment paper that I used for the inside of this book. And then here's the back cover, inside cover of the book. You can see the hinges again and the turn downs. The back has the same pattern as the front does, also blind tooled. You dampen the leather and use a stylus to make those lines and dots. This is the spine of the book, the top of the book, and the bottom of the book. So you get a chance to see the whole book together, and there it is. Thank you so much for looking at my book. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a very great day.
Ah, you're here. My recipe. I will tell it to you. For the veal. So, take veal and make it clean and hack it into gobbets, fine gobbets. Smite it, seethe it up, and take fat broth and temper thy almonds, that thou hast ground, and lye it with flour of rice, and do there a good powder of ginger, and galangale, cannel, maces, cubis and mustard, and color it with saffron. Oh, saffron. And put their veal to serve forth. Serve forth. It's not fine veal. Perhaps on the morrow.
Hi, I'm Adiap Tam, and this is bobbin lace. I first encountered bobbin lace about 20 years ago when I lived in the Kingdom of Atlantia. And I came across a group of ladies sitting under a pavilion making lace, and I had never seen anything like it. I had obviously seen varieties of lace, but it never even occurred to me how it was made. And I got to talking to the ladies about how I could learn, and one of them kind of took me under her wing. Mistress Francesca La Curiosa invited myself and my lady down to her home in southern Atlantia, and for 2 days taught us how to make lace. The ins, the outs. She gave me a book that I still treasure, my first bobbins, a piece of foam that worked very well as a lace pillow, pins, everything I needed to get started. And I've been making lace pretty much ever since. When it comes to lace, the very first thing that I tell people is that it's not as hard as it looks. It's really not. So this particular pattern is made up of plaited lace, which is 4 threads braided together, what's called a 4-pair cross, which is every time 2 sections of plaited lace cross each other, they're woven through each other in a 4-pair cross. Picots, which are the small decorative loops shown. and rose ground, which is the more open woven lace. And none of those techniques are particularly challenging. None of them are extremely difficult at all. None of them are really that hard. And the challenge of lace doesn't even come with integrating these or the consistency of doing it the same way in a repeated pattern over and over and over again. The challenge in lace comes from the dedication that it requires to get it done. So this piece of lace is 36 inches long and represents between 150 and 160 hours of work. Lace averages about a square inch an hour. Bobbin lace does. Other lace actually can be even slower. It is something you have to be dedicated to really accomplish, but it is such a beautiful thing. All lace is braided threads, a pillow, a pricking, bobbins, sticks, also bones. It's frequently referred to as bone lace in documentation and extant pieces, pins, and time. So this particular pattern of lace, as most of the lace that I do, is from a book of patterns called the Pomp, 1559, Patterns for Venetian Bottom Lace. And it was done fairly closely to how it would have been done in period. My pillow is not exactly a historical pillow. It's made of foam covered in brocade fabric. But, and my bobbins are not period design. They would have been more rounded than mine. I may use more pins than they may have used in period. My lace is 100% bleached, the linen thread is. Aside from that, it's basically as it was done in period. Lace in the Elizabethan era was a symbol of wealth and prestige and prosperity and power. Yards and yards and yards of lace were used in cuffs and the neck ruffs that you see of the time. Because of the amount of time that it took to make lace, it was expensive, and therefore only the very wealthy could afford these huge ruffs that took skilled workers to make. I truly hope that people see lace that I've made or that other people have made, and they ask questions, and they think about taking up lace themselves. I am Suradi Aptam, and this is bobbin lace.
Good morning. I'm Praxila Tarna, and I'm going to talk to you about my favorite piece of quarantine gear that I've made in the last year, my Zoom background, which is actually a patchwork cloth of honor made based on a couple of pieces of extant patchwork that we have from the late 15th century and the mid to late 14th century. Those are very far apart, but unfortunately we just don't have a lot of extant pieces of patchwork. And I wanted to try something different, and I wanted to play with patchwork. And so this is what happened. It is a silk textile. It is not a quilt. That is important to note because the extant pieces we have, one of them does show that it was backed and probably tacked together, but as far as quilting, that is not what we have as in our patchwork pieces. The second major extant piece we have was a small pillow, so and again was not quilted. So this is a piece of patchwork, but it is not a patchwork quilt. I'm going to show you some of the pieces of patchwork that we do have. The first of those is the Anjou textile. It was dated 1330 to 1370. It's dated based on the heraldry that is included in it. It's basically a heraldic hanging. It's done with running stitch. The piece was found at the bottom of a Hungarian well. It was obviously not complete, but it does show that that there was possibly a backing due to some of the stitching found during textile conservation. And here are some closer pieces of it. This is obviously during the textile conservation. We can see that it's got appliqué fleur-de-lis. It's edged in some, it's done out of silk. And the pieces we do have are done out of silk. This is the other piece we have, the Impronetta cushion. You can see the back kind of reflected there. The back is from wool, the front is from silk. I used the front part as an example because I was working in silk. It's dated before 1477 because that's when the person that was buried with it was buried. It is only about 12 inches square, so it's quite small, and those pieces are itty bitty tiny. And each of those is edged, it is all edged with a gold cording. The back piece on the wool is also edged with cording, it's not gold. Here's another close-up of that where you can see the itty bitty tiny pieces, some of where it's rotted out. And then here's my cloth of honor. I wanted to make a larger textile in part because I just didn't think I could work with pieces the size of my fingernail. This actually started out as a proof of concept to do a much more, a much smaller, more exact replica of the Impronetta cushion, but it went off in a different direction. Here's some close-ups of my cloth. You can see where I've taken, it's been pieced together, and then I have couched gold cording along each of the seams. Another in better light. And here you can see the edges. I did put a large border on it. Let's see if I can show you a little bit more close up. So I backed it in linen, and I discuss this in my documentation. Mostly that is just for safety, just so that it's more stabilized. Whereas if I just had the single piece of silk with an open backing, that's going to tend to rip and shred. It's hard to show all of this because it's a large piece, but again, we can see the edging over each of the different pieces. Each of these pieces is different kinds of silk. I go into that a little further in my documentation, obviously. I love this. I use it every time I'm at an event or teaching. It sits in the back of me, and I'm very proud of it, super thrilled that I made it. And thanks for letting me show it off to you.
Greetings, your majesties of the East and good gentles all. My name is Rosina von Schaffhausen, and this video is in support of my entry to the Crown's ANS Championship in AS 55. In this video, I will explain the modern pattern analysis technique that I used on a German 16th century brocaded tablet weaving pattern book. This is a math-based technique, but don't worry, I learned the math that this is based on in high school, and it is now in the 8th grade Common Core standards. It requires no algebra and barely any numbers. All you really need are 4 basic geometry terms. The technique that I'm going to explain is a part of symmetry analysis. Symmetry analysis is when we look at a piece of art to see what types of geometric symmetry it has. Symmetry is when we can pick up a piece of art and flip it over, turn it around, or move it in some direction, and when we put it back down, it looks the same as when we started. The first type of symmetry you will need to know to apply the technique I used is whether a piece of art has translation symmetry. A design has translation symmetry when you can shift the design in some distance and some direction, and when you're done, the design still looks the same. The type of patterns I analyzed all have repeating patterns in one direction, so they all have translation symmetry. Only one direction means a design is one-dimensional, so the analysis I am conducting is one-dimensional symmetry analysis. It is possible to have repeating patterns in more than one direction, like in fabric or wallpaper, which are two-dimensional, or even with three-dimensional objects. Also, you can have symmetry where you move the piece, it changes color, like with heraldic counterchanging. These are all types of patterns that you can analyze with symmetry analysis. See my symmetry analysis topic references in my paper for more information if you want to know more. But for this project, I am analyzing brocaded tablet weaving patterns, so they are one-dimensional patterns. If you want to know if you can use a one-dimensional symmetry analysis on a piece of art, check if it has translation symmetry in one direction only, but not counting moving the opposite direction. The second type of symmetry I use is mirror or reflection symmetry. This means you can flip the design over and it looks the same. You can also think of a design with reflection symmetry as having two halves, where each half is a reflection of the other. Notice that there's a line in the design where the mirror goes, or a line that you flip the design over. In a one-dimensional repeating pattern, there are only two possible directions that line can go. It can go parallel to the direction of translation. This is called horizontal reflection. Or it can go perpendicular or at right angles to the direction of the translation. This is called vertical reflection. One-dimensional repeating patterns can also have reflections in both these directions at the same time. Notice that a one-dimensional pattern can repeat in any direction, but you can turn any design so it repeats horizontally. Also, you can assume the design is infinite, even if it ends in the piece of art. We generally ignore slight inconsistencies in the pattern that we can tell are not intentional. Or if there's a curve in the design, from wrapping the design around a piece of pottery or around this rowel spear. Few artists can perfectly recreate the design in each repeat, and in period examples, some of a design may have worn away over time, so we ignore these when looking for symmetry. However, you should be careful of tiny details in the work that are intentional, as they could affect the symmetry. For example, at first glance, you might think that this pattern has mirror symmetry, but the over and under detail in the vine work means that the two sides of this motif are not perfect copies of each other. If you have a hard time visualizing whether a piece of art has a particular symmetry, and you don't have physical access to the art so you can pick it up and move it around or hold a mirror up to it, you can use a computer to do the moving for you. Take a photo or screenshot of the design, paste it twice into a Word document or an art processing program, and use the imaging tools to flip, turn, and move one copy of the image while keeping one copy the same, and compare. The third type of symmetry that one-dimensional repeating patterns can have is rotational symmetry. This means you can turn the design around a point for less than a full turn, and the design will still look the same. The point is the center of the rotation, and the smallest angle you can turn, and it looks the same, is the angle of the rotation. You may have noticed from the examples shown that there are many different angles that could be the angle of rotation of a design. However, with one-dimensional designs, the only possible angle of rotation they can have for rotation symmetry is a 180-degree angle, often called a half turn. So we don't have to worry about the angle of rotation in this analysis and only have to look for half-turn symmetry. Notice that, like with reflection symmetry, you can have a half turn and other symmetries too. The last type of symmetry that a one-dimensional repeating pattern can have is glide reflection symmetry. This symmetry is a combination of a translation and a reflection, but looks differently than just a translation or just a reflection. The translation part of a glide reflection has to go in the same direction as a translation of the whole pattern. So in one-dimensional patterns, it will go horizontally. And the line of reflection part of the glide reflection is also horizontal. The pattern made by a line of footprints in the sand has glide reflection symmetry. Just like with other symmetries, a design can have glide reflection symmetry and other symmetries too. In addition, if a one-dimensional design has horizontal reflection symmetry, as in these two designs, it also has glide reflection symmetry automatically. Now that we have all the types of symmetry a one-dimensional repeating design can have, we can combine them together. The International Union of Crystallography, or IUC, has symbols for all the possible combinations of symmetries that a one-dimensional repeating pattern can have. This is called the IUC notation. There are other types of notation used for these patterns, but I chose to use IUC notation for this project. This notation consists of 4 symbols, where the first one is a letter P. This indicates that the pattern is a one-dimensional pattern. The second symbol is the letter M, if there is a vertical reflection symmetry in the pattern, and a number 1 if there is not a vertical reflection symmetry in the pattern. The third symbol is a letter M if there is a horizontal reflection in the pattern, a letter A if there is a glide reflection but not a horizontal reflection in the pattern, and 1 if there is neither a horizontal nor a glide reflection in the pattern. You can think of the letter A as standing for alternating, as glide reflection designs look like they are alternating on either side of the center line. The last symbol is a 2 if there is half-turn symmetry, and a 1 if there is no rotation symmetry at all. So if you've done the math, you will notice that there are 12 possible combinations of symbols in IUC notation. However, sometimes when you combine 2 symmetries, you automatically get another one. For example, combining a horizontal reflection and a vertical reflection is the same as a half turn. So it turns out that there are only 7 possible combinations of symmetries that a one-dimensional repeating pattern can have. The simplest design in the 7 possible symmetry groups, the design can have just the translation that makes it a one-dimensional repeating pattern and no other symmetries. This is group P111. The design can have a vertical reflection, but no other symmetries other than the translation, and that's group PM11. There can be a group with only a glide reflection and no other of the special symmetries, or P1A1. You might have a horizontal reflection, which means you get a glide reflection automatically, but no other symmetries in addition, or P1M1. You can also have just the half turn, and not any of the other special symmetries, or P112. And then you can have a more complicated combination with a vertical reflection, a half turn, and a glide reflection, but no horizontal reflection, and that's group PMA2. And lastly, you might have all the possible symmetries: the vertical reflection, horizontal reflection, glide reflection, and half turn, and that's group PMM2. If you see a design and want to tell which of the 7 possible combinations of symmetries it has, you can first check for each individual symmetry, and then use the information about the IUC notation to determine which group your design is in. Or you can follow a flowchart. There are a number of flowcharts available on the internet and in the sources in my paper. Now that you've seen the math background behind my research project, you can take a look at the summary of my research analysis of a 16th century German brocaded tablet weaving pattern book, or you can read my research paper to see a fully detailed analysis of the patterns in the pattern book. I also used the symmetry analysis to reconstruct a pattern that is unfinished in the period manuscript.
Hello, I'm Isgerthr Bjargeyjardottir. I play out of the Kingdom of Artemisia and the Barony of Sentinel's Keep, the Rock of Artemisia. Today I'm going to be doing an ANS performance for you. This is a piece that I have been working on for about 6 months now. My Laurel challenged me to look into Gregorian chants, and I have become fascinated with it. And I was particularly interested in anything to do with the plague, given the state of affairs of our world these days. So I found one that I want to share with you today. So this came about in the year 1317, and the setting is Coimbra, Portugal, Coimbra. And at this time, Coimbra was a tiny little village on the river, on one of the ports to the sea of Portugal. And it will eventually become quite a crossroads and a larger city with a university. But at this time, there was only the abbey and a small village. And so this was the poor nuns of St. Clair in Coimbra. And in 1317, the plague was ravaging Portugal and Europe. And tell of this horrible pestilence had come far and wide and had come known to the nuns of St. Clair. And they had started to worry about being trapped inside the abbey. And this abbey actually is still there today if you want to go and look at it. Parts of it are still there today, but it is a very small little place, and they were petrified of being stuck there with this plague coming and dying there. And so they finally had convinced their abbess to let them go, to let them flee and leave the confines of the abbey. And so the abbess had finally agreed to this. And suddenly, as is told, there came a knock on the door, and there was a beggar at the door. And the beggar had in his pocket a prayer. And he provided it to them and said, if you would only read this every day and recite this all the time, every day, you will escape the plague. You will escape the pestilence, and the Lord will protect you. And so, and then he disappeared. And the nuns thought this was so odd that, of course, they started to read the prayer every day. It became then a chant, and in plain chant. And as is told, Coimbra and the nuns escaped the plague. So this is the Stella Chelli Extirpavit. And it comes down to us since 1317. It is still spoken today. I'm sure it's probably being spoken quite a bit over the last year. The translation is, "The star of heaven that nourished the Lord drove away the plague of death, which the first parents of man brought into the world. May this bright star now vouchsafe to extinguish that foul constellation whose battles have slain the people with the wound of death. O most pious star of the sea, preserve us from pestilence. Hear us, O Lady, for thy Son honors thee by denying thee nothing. Save us, O Jesus, for whom thy Virgin Mother supplicates thee." And this is the Stella Celi. Excuse me. Stella Celi extirpavit, quae lactavit Dominum, mortis pestem quam plantavit, primus parens hominum, ipsa stella nunc dinietur, sidera compescere, corum bella plebum cedunt, dire motis sucere. O pissima Stella Maris, a pestes accurret nobis, audi nos Domina nom filius tuus, nihil negans te honorat. Salva nos Iesu, pro quibus Virgo Mater te orat. Thank you.